The biggest news in Asia this week has been the visit of President Xi to Vietnam. It's very significant for China, for Vietnam, for Southeast Asia, for all of Asia, and impacting also relationship with Western countries. What is happening now? President Xi is visiting Vietnam, and the President of Vietnam, Party Secretary General, have visited China numerous times in the last several years. So it's like, as President Xi said, family visiting each other, brothers visiting each other. It's brothers plus comrades. I think what we have to look at in terms of Vietnam is a target of the U.S. to be a proxy against China. So far, Vietnam has not agreed to do so. And on the Chinese side, some complain Vietnam is being two-faced, sitting on the fence, trying to benefit from both sides. But ultimately, I say Vietnam is doing what's best for Vietnam. Vietnam needs to develop. It could get capital or investments from the U.S. It could also get capital investments from China. What's really significant about Vietnamese economic growth is that it is very much based on China's economic growth. It is very much tied into China's supply chain, China's value chain, and Chinese import and exports. So ultimately, it is beneficial for Vietnam to be in such a commercial, strong relationship with China, and that has contributed to Vietnam's growth. This is the thing about it's best for Vietnam to be mutually beneficial in relationship with China, which the U.S. doesn't want Vietnam to be in. The U.S. looks at Vietnam as a potential drag on China, a potential competitor to China. I think one has to realize that in the U.S. context, it's you are on my side or you are my enemy. Whereas in the Chinese context, it's you are my side, you can be on the other side too, but as long as we get along and we have a mutually beneficial relationship, that's fine. Now, Vietnam is very, very important for China, of course, in terms of its strategic location, in terms of its influence over neighboring Southeast Asian countries, in terms of its economic strength as well. Vietnam also happens to be a major target of Chinese investment to become part of the Chinese supply chain. I think what jokingly some Vietnamese friends have said to me is that it used to be made in China, but now it's made by China, but not only in China, but also in neighboring countries like Vietnam. And Vietnam grew very, very rapidly, but it has issues to address as well. Infrastructure, roads, electricity, ports. I remember 2 years ago when the ports were jammed for weeks, where ships have to sit outside and wait before containers could be loaded or unloaded. That's because the port capacity is insufficient compared to its growth rate. And then in terms of electricity, beginning of this year, there were many stories coming out of media in Vietnam that Vietnam is buying electricity from Guangxi, from China, because its hydropower stations were running really low because the Mekong River was drying up. So you could see that the relationship between Vietnam and China is really like that of brothers. They help each other, they depend on each other, and they work with each other to improve the relationship and improve the livelihood of its people. So I think I can be sure, I'm actually very confident, that the visit by President Xi to Vietnam will bring about even greater results of the relationship between the two, and probably a deeper relationship, a more profound relationship of tying in with each other. Asia has been the most significant driving force of economic growth for the rest of the world. Vietnam is a very important part of that, but one has to admit that the core of this growth has been China over the last 3 decades. And Asia, if it continues on this path, will continue to rise and create a much better environment for growth of other countries, including Middle East, including Africa, including Latin America. So I think Asia is the driving force of growth for the rest of the world, at least for now, and has been for 3 decades, and hopefully will continue to do so. and Vietnam will play its part, and China will play its part in contributing to the global betterment of humanity.